Hi everyone. In the previous lesson, we saw how demand and supply interact to determine equilibrium price and quantity. But now we go one level deeper. We ask, do price changes always lead to large changes in behavior? The answer is not necessarily. And this is where one of the most important concepts in microeconomics comes in. Price elasticity of demand, or PED. Let's start with a simple example. If the price of chocolate doubles, many people will buy less. That seems obvious. But now consider something like electricity or basic food. Even if prices rise, people may not reduce consumption very much. So clearly, different goods respond differently to price changes. The key question is, how responsive are consumers to price changes? Price elasticity of demand measures this responsiveness. It is defined as the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price. Importantly, elasticity measures percentage changes, not absolute changes. This is crucial because a £1 increase in price means very different things depending on whether the product costs £2 or £100. So, elasticity allows us to compare responsiveness across different goods in a consistent way. The formula of the PED is percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. This tells us how much quantity changes relative to price. Now, there is an important detail. Price and quantity demanded move in opposite directions, so PED is usually negative. However, we typically focus on the magnitude, not the sign. So we often ignore the negative and treat elasticity as a positive value. Let's go through an example. Suppose price increases by 10% and quantity demanded falls by 20%. PED would equal to negative 20 divided by 10, which equals to negative 2. Ignoring the negative sign, the elasticity is 2. This means demand is elastic. Consumers are highly responsive to price changes. A small change in price leads to a relatively large change in quantity demanded. We now classify demand into two main types. Elastic demand, which is when PED is greater than 1. Quantity demand is highly responsive to price. A small price change leads to a large change in quantity. And inelastic demand, which is when PED is less than 1. Quantity demand is not very responsive. Even large price changes leads to relatively small changes in quantity. This distinction is extremely important for both firms and governments. However, elasticity is not random. It depends on several key factors. 1. Substitutes. The more substitutes a good has, the more elastic demand is. Consumers can easily switch. 2. Necessity versus luxury. Necessities tends to be inelastic. Luxuries tend to be elastic. 3. Proportion of income. Expensive goods takes up larger share of income, so demand is more elastic. 4. Time. Demand is usually more elastic in the long run. Consumers have more time to adjust behavior. These factors explain why elasticity varies across different goods. Now, elasticity has a direct relationship with revenue. If demand is elastic, an increase in price leads to a decrease in revenue because the drop in quantity demanded is proportionally larger. However, if demand is inelastic, an increase in price leads to an increase in revenue because quantity demanded does not fall much. This is why governments often tax goods with inelastic demand, because consumption does not fall significantly, tax revenue is stable. Now let's apply this to a real world context. Is demand for private education elastic? In a short run, demand is relatively inelastic. Parents are already committed, switching schools is difficult. However, in the long run, demand becomes more elastic. Families can adjust. They may switch to state schools or relocate. This distinction is crucial when analyzing policies like VAT on school fees. There's also several common mistakes students make. 1. Forgetting what a negative sign means. It simply reflects the inverse relationship between price and quantity. 2. Confusing slope of elasticity. A steep curve does not necessarily inelastic. Elasticity depends on percentage changes. 3. Assuming elasticity is constant. Elasticity can change along the curve and over time. Let's summarize. Price elasticity of demand measures responsiveness to price changes. It uses percentage changes, not absolute changes. Elastic demand means high responsiveness. Inelastic demand means low responsiveness. Elasticity affects revenue and tax outcomes. The key takeaway is this: not all demand reacts the same way to price changes. Understanding elasticity allows us to predict behavior more accurately. It is one of the most powerful tools in microeconomics. In the next lesson, we will study price elasticity of supply, which is how responsive firms are to price changes. Thank you very much.